Hi there everyone, welcome back to Dandelion Delphi tutorials. This is only for our grade 12s as we are going to look at question 2, the OOP question of the final of 2015. You can expect this question as question 3 in your final papers. Before you continue to watch, I would like you to download the final of 2015 from www.education.gov.za and do the paper while you are watching the video. You can ignore the variables here declared for Java and just focus on the attributes for Delphi that start with an F. This is an older paper where schools were still able to choose between Delphi and Java. Even by reading the descriptions here, I still have some questions because the 6-character registration code, could that be a number? Could the characters be numbers? Or should this be a string? And also for the expiry date, even though this is the format, would it be a string or maybe a T-date data type? So it's always important to have a look at the declaration that was given to you in the data files. Question 2.1, or in your case 3.1, will be the instructions on what to do in your class. Usually we have the constructor first, but in this instance they gave us another method. They gave the declaration as well as the skeleton code, and you had to remove the comments and then complete it. But even if I had to do this myself, I can see the method is receiving a value, so there is my parameter. And it is also returning a value, and therefore it is a function. Press pause and try this yourself. They told us in the description of the class that this would be the format of our date. And what we need to do is we need to add 2 to this year, but keeping the rest the same. So I'm going to use the parameter there that I received. I'm going to copy out the first 4 characters using copy. That means I'm copying out those 4 characters. I need to make it an integer so that I can then add 2 to it. And that answer now needs to be converted back into a string so that I'm able to add it back to this date. I can't just add the date back to the parameter date because I still have the existing year there. So first I need to get rid of the first 4 characters, which is the old year, by using delete. So I'm using delete with pdate, 1, 4 to get rid of those. Just careful not to get rid of the slash as well. You have 2 options here. I can insert S year into, this should be pdate, the parameter, and then I can put it in position 1. But then I still will have to assign pdate to my result. So instead of doing that, I've just used S year that I calculated 2 years from the existing date, and I added pdate, which now contains the slash and the 2 values for the month, the slash and the day at the beginning of this date. And that is what my function will return in its result. I just added here for you what you would have to do should you prefer to use insert to ensure that your function returns something in the result. Now it's time to create the constructor method. Remember to read carefully to see what it is receiving and do not create more or less parameters than is asked. Here we can see it's the name and the registration code of the student, as well as the date that they registered. Have a look at your class variables declared for you, where your attributes or your fields are declared at the top, so that your parameters match the data types of those attributes. You then have to assign the parameters to the attributes fname and freg code, but then you need to use your determine expiry date with the parameter that you're receiving to determine the expiry date. You also need to set sessions completed to 0. Sometimes the constructor methods are given, but in this case you have to do it. But it is not the first question of the section. That often means that the method that you created before this question you will be using in your constructor. Always do the questions from top to bottom and only create one method at a time. Press pause and try the constructor yourself. So deciding on the data types of my parameters that I have to declare, I have a look here at my field. So there I can see the name, the register code, as well as the expiry date are all strings. And for that reason, I am creating my constructor create with 3 parameters as the question asked, but all as string data types. Then you will press Ctrl-Shift-C and complete the rest of the question. Remember that our fields must be on the left in our constructor as they are receiving values. F for first. So fields on the left, parameters on the right. And then I'm going to use determine expiry date by sending it the parameter of this date received to determine if expiry date. Remember, determine expiry date was a function, so therefore it has to be part of another statement. In this case, it is giving if expiry date a value. So I'm putting if expiry date here on the left, which is a string field, and my function is returning a string data type. So they are compatible. And then I'm also asked to set the sessions completed to 0, which I've done as the last line of this code. Now you are asked to write a mutator. And remember, mutators start with set. They have given us the name as well. They are procedures and they are always public. Sometimes they receive parameters and sometimes they don't. So we have to read carefully. Here we can see that it's receiving one parameter value, and that value will be used to set the if sessions completed field. Press pause and try it yourself. Here is my set sessions completed, receiving an integer value because I'm making a change to if sessions completed, which is also integer, and I need to match them in data type. Then you're going to push Ctrl-Shift-C. You can see it's a procedure in public. And all I need to do here is I'm going to use my parameter received to set the sessions completed attribute. The next question is asking me to write a method increase sessions completed. It does not contain the word receive, therefore it has no parameters. You can also see that it's not returning a result, and therefore it would be a procedure. Only when the word return or result or access a method is in the question would it be a function. So this procedure, all it needs to do is increase the sessions completed by 1. Press pause and try it yourself. By default, I'm always going to declare these methods as public unless the question states differently. So this is a procedure, no parameters, and then I push Ctrl-Shift-C, and all I have to do here is inc my sessions completed, which is the attribute of this class. Here I'm asked to write a method called evaluate progress that receives the total number of sessions contained in the instructor course. Now, number of sessions can't be real, so therefore it would be an integer parameter, and the word receives indicate that this is a parameter. And very important, it returns a string, so therefore I'm creating a function with a string result. Read and try this part of the question, and I will scroll down so that you can see the rest just now. Here is the rest of the question. Press pause and try it yourself. Here is my function evaluate progress that receives an integer number, that is the total number of sessions that I'm going to use to calculate that percentage with, and it is returning a string. Then you're going to push Ctrl-Shift-C, and this is how I completed it. I declared a local variable or a percentage because that is used to calculate the percentage that they have completed of the total. Remember with percentages that we will multiply with 100. Averages we won't. And I'm using if sessions completed. It would have some value. It's an attribute of the field. And dividing that by the total number of sessions completed, multiplying with 100 for that percentage. If the percentage is more than 75, make sure that is more than and not greater than and equal to. Then my result is the name of the person, also an attribute of the class, qualifies as an instructor. If the percentage is less or equal to 75, then my result will be percentage completed, and I am displaying this percentage that I calculated up here. Also have a look at little things in the screenshot like that percentage sign there at the end, as well as at the number of decimals to be displayed. And finally, we have to write a toString. A toString is always public and always a function and always returns a string result, and it has no parameters. When we have a look at the format, ignore these little brackets there. You don't have to add them. They are just indicating that these are attributes or fields of your class, like if name, that you have to place in there. These square brackets, though, are important, as you can see in the example of output at the bottom. Press pause and try it yourself. Here is my toString function with a string data type. I am going to start with the result is assigned to getName. I could also use fName there, but I saw that they gave a whole bunch of accessor methods, getName, getCode, so I've used them in here just in case. But here I can use fName and fRegisterCode with my square brackets, very important that they are in there, and then I have my enter at the end of that line. I've started off my result by initializing it with the first line that will be displayed, and now I'm building onto my result to have the next label and then the expiry date, and then add onto my result completed sessions with an into string of get sessions completed. The memo indicated that we were allowed to use our attributes or our fields everywhere where I have used a get here. Both of them would be correct. This is now the time to save and run your program. You will not have any output, but at least you can sort out any syntax errors that you might have made in this class. We have been provided with a text file, data.q2.txt, that contains data looking like this. This here is the registration code of the person, and then trained on the date, and then whether they have completed that session or not. We're now moving on to the main form, and we're starting with question 2.2, which would be 3.2 in your final exams. And the first thing we needed to do was to get all the input from the user and then instantiate the object. They have declared the object for you, and then you need to display the toString. This part of your code is extremely important, as without this working, none of the rest of the program will work. Press pause and try it yourself. The object was declared for you, and now what you need to do is first get input from the user to be able to send them as arguments to your constructor create. And to remember this line of code, which is the important line that won't work unless you get it right, is copy out the declaration, then paste it where you want to instantiate your object. You then add an equal sign to form an assignment statement, and then push .create. Now, if you have done everything correctly up to now, you will have some hints here indicating what arguments you need to send your constructor create, as well as then the data types. However, if this message does not pop up, continue to code, but keeping in mind what the parameters were of your constructor. I've copied and pasted for you the heading of the constructor create here, because our parameters and the arguments that we send our constructor or any other method must match in NOD, number, order, and data type. My constructor has 3 parameters, therefore I need to send it 3 arguments. That's the number. The order is very important. First the name, then the code, then the date. So name, code, and date, those must match. And then finally, I have to match them in D for data type. They're all strings, so for that reason, these arguments here must all be strings. Note that we don't put this data type here at the end as we would in the declaration of the constructor. Then I was asked to display the toString. I could see that it was at the top of the rich editor. For that reason, I have added a .clear. And this line here was the last that you would make use of T student. From now on, you will always use your object. So object dot toString. A toString is a function and therefore needs to be part of another statement. They are often called in rich edits, show messages, or even in labels. Maybe even in a panel, anything that can display, but they will never stand on their own. I've now been asked to check whether or not the text file exists, and if the file does not exist, I have to display a message and close the program. If the file does exist, then I have to display the student's name, and I have to use the registration code of the student to search for the student and then count the number of sessions that they completed. Remember, the text file said completed or not completed. Then we need to display the date of the training sessions completed by the student as well. We needed to use our methods from our class to set the attributes for this number of sessions completed. That was one of our procedures. And then we also need to enable the buttons for these two questions. You then need to run your program and make sure that you're getting the correct output for this person. It's important that when they are giving you two examples of input and output, that you do test for both. Press pause, try it yourself, and see if you can get the correct output. As I was asked in button 2.2.2, I'm testing if the file exists, displaying a message, and this time they actually asked us to end the application. That means that I have to use application.terminate, but when I look at the memo, they also accepted exit. Then we had to, if the file did exist, we had to display the student's name, and they have provided us with a accessor method getName. So here I'm just using my class and my object.getName to display the person's name at the top. Then we had a label there, or just a heading, dates of completed sessions, and I have my normal assign file and reset file. Remember that text files can be part of any one of your 4 questions. I will need my while not end of file and my begin and end, and don't forget your close file. So usually what I do is I do my assign file, reset, while not end of file, begin, end, and close file, and then code in between. Also recommended is to take a line from your text file and copy it into the while loop as a comment so that you can see what you are dealing with while you are coding. We have our normal read file, T file into S-line. So now S-line will contain a line that looks like this. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to first of all see that we are at a line that contains the student code or the register code of this person. So that is the first pos of my if statement. I'm using my object.getCode, also an accessor method provided for me, that will return a code that would look like this for the current person in my class. And if I find that code in the string from the text file in position 1, it means I'm in a line that contains their code. But what I also needed to do was to test if they have completed that session, because I'm only counting the number of completed sessions. Now I can't just look for completed, as the lines that have a training session that was completed contains the word completed. So that makes it a little bit difficult to test for just completed, because completed appears in both lines, whether it's not completed or completed. What I've done in here is I've used my pos to say, if not completed in this line does not exist. So if the pos returns a 0, it means it is a completed session. So this if statement will be true if the code exists in the line and if it does not contain not completed. Then only will I call my object increase completed method. And remember, increase sessions completed was a procedure, so it stands on its own. It's just object.increase sessions completed. The next part here, I'm looking to get access to that date. So to get access to the date, I have used pos. And what I'm searching for is for that space, the on and the space. in my pos. That will now return for me the position where this space here was found in the string. Then I'm going to delete that string, starting at the position of 1 for IPOS characters, but I'm going to add 3 because IPOS is going to return for me that position there, and I still have to then get rid of the on and that space to be left with only the date. And for that reason, I added +3. The next part is just searching for that hash and then copying out everything from 1 until just before the hash. So I will now have the date stored as sDate inside of my string. Now in my rich edit, I am just displaying that date that I have stored. And in this way, it will find all the dates. This part is my sDate inside of my if statement and display them as from my text file. You can see that there's quite a large space open here, and for that reason I have added 2 empty lines below this code. Here I have my 2 empty lines as well as now displaying again my toString. And then very important is that you had to enable these 2 buttons by setting the enabled property to true. In this button, we are asked to add a training session as entered by the user in the text box provided and then add that to our text file. It's important to make sure that you still match the format as it was written to the text file previously. So they've given you the example there at the top. Now you need to write code to compile a string to be written to this text file and add it. So we're only going to use append. Remember, this button was enabled when the file existed and we found this user. So for that reason, we don't have to test if the file exists or create it using a rewrite. We're only using an append. We then also need to display a message indicating that this information was updated. Don't lose out on this mark here thinking it's not important. These are the easy marks that are allocated to our papers. We also need to update the session if it is completed by using our methods from our class and also display a true string. I will always use the methods from my class wherever possible. So here I'm using getCode and then trained on, and this is my string that I'll be writing to my text file. I will then add to that the training date that the user entered in the text box with the hash at the end. They would indicate on the checkbox whether they've completed the session or not. So if the .check property is true, I then add to my string completed. I also then call my increase sessions completed procedure to increase the number of sessions they completed so that my toString would also be updated. Then I have sline and I add to sline not completed. Now I need to add this line to my text file. So I have to have my assign file T file with the name of that text file. And if you didn't use a close file where you were reading from the text file in the previous question, your program will crash here as you need to close it before you can assign it again. Here I have append that will open up my program or my data file ready to write to and place the cursor at the bottom of the text file for me. And then I have my write line T file, and I am just writing sline to that I've built at the top. And very important is to have your close file T file, else you won't be able to click on this button again. Then that message that I told you guys is important, a dot clear, and displaying my toString. This line here at the bottom I just added to see what I'm writing to my text file, but this was not actually part of the question. Ideally, you shouldn't have extra code in your program, but in this instance, that doesn't really matter, and I won't lose marks for having added it. For this last button, there's actually more reading and understanding the question than there is code to complete. So press pause and try it yourself. All I had to do here was get input from the user for the total number of sessions required to qualify as an instructor, and then use that variable there to send to evaluate progress. It needed an integer parameter to calculate that percentage of 75%. So that's why I'm sending it sessions. Evaluate progress returned a string to indicate whether they qualified or not. So therefore, I will call it as part of the label's caption. It's almost like a toString, since it is a function that returns a string. And remember, our functions must always be called as part of other statements. So for that reason, I can call it with a caption. It returns a string and caption is a string, so it is compatible. Remember to run and test your program to see if you get the output of both of these screenshots. I hope you are now ready for your question 3, which would be OOP. Very important is that you go and download more past papers and practice them. For more information about OOP, you can have a look at Dandelion Delphi Book 3, and I hope to see you soon.